So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And it's always good. It's the last CISO talk for the year, the fifth one we had, and we had a really good success story so far. And I'm really looking forward to more of that next year. But the topic for today is really, again, somehow a mixture of technology and awareness. We talked about before that awareness training is more or less dead, and we need to change on behavior. So we thought, how can we put technical and human aspects together, which then really boosts cyber awareness? And that should be this is the topic for today. I'm your host, Andreas Wuchner, and thanking already everyone for joining us today. As everyone who has joined me before, let's keep this as interactive as possible. The Q&A part is always open. If you have questions, if you have ideas, or if you think we are talking nonsense, let us know. Lars in the background will make sure that I'm not missing any of that. And the more we can answer, the more lively a debate becomes, the better it is. So with no further ado, let me introduce my two valuable panelists today. I have two really interesting guests today. One is Ben Donaldson, the community manager at CybSafe. So he does a lot with the customers of CybSafe, so he can talk a lot about things which works and we don't work. And on the other side, I have Dave Baguette, the founder and CEO of Inky, and a technology company out of the US who is specialized on mail security and tools which allows people to do the right thing natively. So both of you, thanks a lot for joining me today.
No, thank you. Very excited to be here and see what conversations come out of it. I know that I have a lot to say on the topic, and I'm sure Dave does too.
Yeah, same here. Great to be here.
Super. So then let's get it started. And, the team did a poll before. And before I ask you the question, Dave, the question was, what type of technical solution do you have in place to block emails or support users to identify malicious emails? And this was quite interesting because the poll showed that roughly half the people have a content and context analysis in place and they do something. The other 50% says either we do nothing, we do link rewriting, or we do kind of banner support, right? So to make the people aware. But we still know that emails are still the #1 attack vector in the companies when we talk about cybercrime. Organizations have developed all kinds of technical security tools, as we just heard, and still email seems to be the way the people use to get into organizations. Why is that? Why we spend all that money and everything is there, but still the numbers are growing? How do you see that? What's the reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it? But my flip answer is because it works. I mean, it works for the attackers. And there are a bunch of reasons why it works. One reason it works is because it's cheap and easy to set up a mail server on the internet and start sending mails, because mail's federated. There's no rule that says you have to get certified to put a mail server on the internet. It's all federated, so anyone can send mails, and people are increasingly using accounts they're taking over to send malicious mails. And the other thing is that mail is such an old protocol, people don't realize, but it actually dates back to 1971, believe it or not. And a lot of the security features have been sort of grafted onto email, and they're still not, they're nowhere near the level of something you'd get in a messaging app like Signal. So we're dealing with this massively ubiquitous, very easy to run, somewhat insecure system. And I think, the other reason is mail's been around long enough, and the incumbent mail systems have been fairly static. They haven't really been terribly innovative in the last 5 to 10 years. And the attackers now understand how to exploit them and get past them. The attackers are using, we're seeing incredibly sophisticated use by attackers of obscure corners of HTML, CSS, Unicode tricks to not only fool the mail protection engines and get stuff through, but also fool the end users. And, finally, I think people are relying on conventional phishing awareness training where you show people fake fish once a quarter or once a month, and it's just not working that well. And I think, one of the insights that we at Inky developed a few years ago is, hey, if I'm a bad guy and I want you to think of Microsoft, I could just take a real mail I got from Microsoft and make some trivial changes to it and replay that. How are you expecting to train a user to see that that's not really Microsoft if the HTML is identical? If it's visually identical to a real mail from Microsoft, what are you supposed to be training them to see? And so it's clear to us that no amount of pure phishing awareness training alone is going to solve the problem. And, to your point, excuse me, we think it's going to have to be a combination of humans and machines working in tandem. So it's clear that, it's easy to do this. It works for attackers. It's the number one vector, and the old method of just using simulated fish isn't working anymore.
That's cool. Before I go to Ben and ask for the awareness side, as you know, I have a 25-year-old son, and he only uses email because of the company who needs to do appointments and things. Everything else happens via chat, Slack, whatsoever, because you mentioned Signal, right? How do you see this developing in the future? Is email and the protection of email dying, and will there be a new vector or a more intense vector there?
I love this question because people have been asking me this. I've been working on email broadly since mid 2000s, and people have been asking me about the imminent death of email since then. And it's actually the case that there are more email accounts now than there were in 2005, and it's growing consistently year over year. I kind of see this explosion of communication channels as mostly additive. In other words, there's this theory we have that, well, now that we can use Signal, we'll stop using email. Well, no, we'll just use both, actually, right? And it just becomes more and more balkanized. And I like to think of email as kind of like the plumbing underneath London, right? Like, you're never going to get rid of it. You're stuck with it forever. So you better figure out how to deal as best you can with it. And, at the same time, let's not forget, like, email it's really cool that it's federated, right? Nobody owns it. No one can control it. No one can censor it, right? I mean, so that's actually a really good thing, that it also presents challenges for things like spam and malicious emails.
So that's, I guess, the feeling I have as well, right? We all have this information overflow. We just have more and more channels, right? So it's more to come. It becomes a little worse than better, I guess. So Ben, if the technology does whatever it can and has still some limitations, at the same time, we, as Dave just said, awareness training alone does not work either. Why is this, why is this now? Why is the limitation coming up now? Because this is a topic we talk about, training and awareness, email, ransomware, phishing since years, right? We do simulations and all that stuff. Why is this? What's the reason? What's your take on the situation there?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think we've come a long way since the days of kind of that whole trick, train, entertain piece. And I mentioned this in another talk I did last week, but traditional cybersecurity awareness is commonly associated with annual training and phishing metrics, namely click rates on those phishing simulations. So you can't measure anything from those, really. How do you prove meaningful change and risk reduction from how many people have clicked on a phishing email and how many people have completed your training? You can't. Similarly, how much of your organization actually enjoy needing to do their annual training? You don't speak to anybody at the cafeteria and they go, oh, you know what, thoroughly enjoyed that hour and a half clicking through a series of decks or doing this game that somebody's probably pretty badly put together. I am speaking from my own personal experience here from previous organizations. But the moment I think people hear cybersecurity internally, they assume either something's gone wrong or you're there to tell them off to do something or to do more training. I'm not saying that's the case in all organizations, but I feel that the first impression a lot of cybersecurity teams have had in organizations is mainly negative because it's that they're a blocker within the organization. Again, I'm not saying this was wrong to measure those things, the compliance metrics for training and click rates. I was guilty of doing it myself when I worked at Dyson. I'd just kind of come into the industry. I worked there for 2 years, and the things that changed over that 2 years were crazy. The expectation was like that at the time. You measure how many people have completed your training, and you see how many people are clicking on your simulation phishing links. As long as NIST and ISO keep mandating this and saying, if you want to pass, you have to do these things, we're going to continue to see that happen. So like David has said, we're never going to get away from compliance. Compliance will always be a factor, and it's going to stay there for a long time. But understanding that there is a much more progressive way to do this, and a next step forwards in measuring human cyber risk, understanding behavior change and influencing it positively is kind of the next big thing, I feel. The limitations, I guess, from the old style metrics and old style of awareness are only just being realized now as we admit that the change hasn't been possible. The hardest thing for anybody to do is to say, yeah, fair enough, the last 4 years of things that we've been trying haven't worked. If they did work, we wouldn't see half of the things we see in the news now, right? So it's a bitter pill to swallow, but we can learn from it, we can adapt, we can kind of, the criminals are obviously adapting because we're still seeing these things in the news. And we're now moving into the space of continually measuring security behaviors, positively influencing behavior change. But we have to be careful that just because somebody is aware, it doesn't mean that they care. You can make someone aware of risks, but how do you actually make them care about it? And kind of, I think moving into that whole, and we will come on to this later and I kind of speak about it, but this whole helping somebody at the point at which they need it. And there's a great balance there to have with this link between tech and people that we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah, it's quite pretty interesting, because the second poll Lars and the team did was asking the people, do you cover reporting of a suspicious email in your cyber awareness program, right? And thanks God, no one said, no, we don't. So mostly was either we cover it in training or in phishing simulations, right? But whenever, out of my own experience, right, whenever we measured something like, a third of all the people are really reporting a phishing, then we were already pretty happy, right? Because a lot of people cannot be bothered, it's not my job and all that stuff. So I think when you talk about reporting, there's still a lot of room for improvements to proactively and not enable, but encourage people to say, look, oh yeah, for the good of the organization, this looks wrong, this looks fishy. I tell the security team about it, right? Obviously, there is still a lot there, what we can do. But you talked about the training and the compliance element, I guess, of training. I think very valid point, right? Because a lot of companies do security training because they have to. They don't care really about cultural change, behavior change. I have an obligation, I do it, tick, right? And valid approach, not a good one, but a valid one. But I have the same feeling like you. There is a shift. We see a shift. Companies see that if I enable and empower people to do the right thing, and if it's through notching or through helping when they need it and all that stuff, that there is far more to get out than just a compliance thing. You as a community manager, do you see this in the wider customer base as well, or is it still there that the majority of customers are just saying, okay, compliance is enough?
We're seeing the shift, it's happening slowly, but the things that we are seeing are so positive. Both big organizations, HSBC as a prime example, a CybSafe customer, we've seen them run some incredible behavior change programs, but small as well. They are shifting towards this approach. But just to go back to this kind of trick, train, entertain piece, I was sent an article earlier by our own internal science and research team. Researchers ran a 15 months, I'm going to read this because I'm trying to remember often all the figures off the top of my head. They ran a 15-month phishing experiment with 14,000 participants. The organization sent phishing simulations to employees and tracked, the first thing was clicks on suspicious emails. The second was risky actions, so submitting credentials, enabling macros on attached documents. The participants who completed a risky action post the phishing simulation were randomized, kind of randomly selected to do training, and others had no training control. So they had a kind of a pretty wide spread of two different pools. The training included information, videos, quizzes. The experiment demonstrated that after failing a phishing simulation and being directed straight into a training page, participants were more likely afterwards to fall for a phishing simulation again. So increasing susceptibility of phishing. That training piece and that one study alone highlights that compliance and the single part of training cannot work on its own. When you look from a kind of people beginning to understand that to be compliant and reduce human cyber risk without relying on completion metrics and cybersecurity phishing simulations, you can look at all of these different behaviors. And CybSafe and our science team have created SebDB, which I'm sure somebody will be able to link to in here, which has over 70 cybersecurity behaviors that you can measure. It's a free online resource, and it shows you the shift away from compliance needs to working towards using influence programs and combining technology along with those to help influence positive security change. Now, I'm going to quickly just, I know this is meant to be a flow of discussion here, but give a bit of a nugget of hopefully something people can take away in talking about the 6-step influence programs. So step 1 is to kind of find out what the risk is. What is the risk that's most prominent to your business? In my first couple of months at Dyson, I was just like, right, what do I need to do? I've got to do all this on my own. But actually talking to the teams, talking to the SOC, your threat intel teams, gathering that information to make it relevant to your business. If you look externally and go, what do I need to do for cyber awareness? It's not specific to your business. So speaking to them and understanding what are the risks that I need to cover, it makes it more digestible and approachable. The second step is being specific about the behaviors that you want to address. So targeting a handful is way better than trying to target everything involved with any risk that's ever happened. It's an impossible task, and you will end up burning out, you will lose resource, and you'll lose credibility in your organization because you're not changing anything. So that kind of is step 2. Step 3 is describing the desired behavior change. So what is the desired outcome that you would like to see? Is it a visible reduction in that risk? A number of people who have, I don't know, SSO enabled, if it's not already mandated, MFA turned on, people reporting suspicious messages, people reporting tailgating. Those are all things you can measure. And the next is kind of naming the intervention that will lead to the desired behavior change. So this could be a technical control, a nudge, a just-in-time intervention, or a point of risk intervention, a piece of micro-learning but understanding that assigning a module to somebody and seeing if they've completed it is not showing behavior change. It's just informing them. And like I said at the beginning, just because somebody's aware doesn't mean that they care. Measuring how somebody reacts to an intervention or a control, you would argue does. The kind of 5th point is citing the research and evidence that this intervention is likely to work. What's your organizational culture? Is it quite creative in its one, and then you can format something off the back of that? Is it something that's actually quite formal and people respond better to those kind of things? So understanding that as well, and again, brings in the culture piece. Think outside of the box. And the last piece, I know I've spoken for a long time, is describing how you will measure whether you have changed the specific behavior and keep on measuring it. There's nothing worse than getting 6 months down the line and going, right, we're going to measure this, and then actually not knowing where you started from. You can't see how far you've come. Similarly, once you're at that 6-month point, when you next going to measure to see where you've kind of gone from there? If it's working, if it's not working, you can adapt and change. So I've given you kind of people on this call an entire process, I suppose, and there is an ebook online that's free about this, of how to step away from focusing just on the compliance piece to actively moving towards measuring and reducing cyber risk.
I think what just to make it a little concrete, is what you're talking about is if you want to focus on, for example, ransomware, and say, look, I'm afraid about ransomware, just not look only on phishing, also look on privacy settings of the people, educate them how have security settings at home, educate them if they use their company email address on social media. I think that's what you're saying, right? End to end, and create a baseline first, how many and then start addressing one thing by each other or after each other to really see if you make progress on it, and report back if you get better overall for that one risk element, right? Instead of just shooting into the wild and hope that someone falls out of the sky.
Sure, for sure.
Okay, cool. So But Dave, if we see a trend towards risk focused on the human side, is there anything more? Is there anything development? As you said, email is quite an old technology. Are there any new developments, anything interesting, any ways how to enable people to do natively the right thing, you know, instead of concept, oh, I need to be aware everywhere. Are there any developments, anything which is hot and interesting or new? Let's go like this.
Yeah, I mean, there's improvements both on the algorithmic side. You know, we're doing some interesting stuff with computer vision to detect more of the things that are getting through the incumbent systems. We can talk a little bit about that if you want. But then also, you know, further to Ben's points, enabling humans to do better is really an area of focus now, especially for phishing vendors like us. So I'll give you an example. You know, we want to make it easy for people to do the right thing. It's one thing to treat the end users as the problem, right? And that's where I think, you know, Ben mentioned often the initial reaction that the employees get from the cyber team is, you know, hostility, right? You guys shouldn't be clicking on stuff. Stop doing that, you know. We tend to view the users as an asset, but it's our job to make it easy for users to do the right thing. And I'll give you a couple examples. Ben talked about reporting phish. We want our users to report phish. Well, then don't make them go hunt around to try to find some button in their Outlook toolbar, right? What we do at Inky is in every single mail, we embed a link, a simple link, report this email. The user can click that. And then we ask them, do you think it's safe, spam, or phishing? And the other part of this is make it not just easy for them, but actually useful to them. So one of the things that you can do as a user, when you click that report this mail link, you can say, hey, this is spam. I don't want this anymore. And you can block that sender for yourself. So it's not just facilitating the behavior you want from the employees in terms of reporting malicious mail. It's also giving them a tool to reduce the clutter in their inbox. Another example is give them useful information continuously, because one of the problems that Ben highlighted with the typical phishing awareness training regime is you do it once a quarter. You go assign someone to read a module. I remember talking to someone who is very high up at a large multinational company, and they said, do you know who's the most targeted by phishing? Of course I knew, it's the executives, right? And then she said, do you know who most often gets out of doing the phishing awareness training? The executives. They're not actually doing the training because they get their, you know, EA to get them out of it. So we think it needs to not be once in a while, but continuous. So one of the things that we do is we've taken that idea of the banner and we've turned it into a full-blown email assistant where instead of just saying, hey, user, this is external, we run our analysis of the mail just like we would do to determine, hey, should this go straight to quarantine? You know, is it malicious? But we use the output of that AI analysis to give the user guidance. So on about 10%, 15% of emails that users receive, they're real emails. We annotate them with a yellow banner that says one of 75 different things. And some of those things are, whoa, we think this is an account takeover. Like this doesn't look like the normal thing this person writes. This might be a third-party email account that got hacked. Yellow banner, right? Slow down and think about whether this is really who you think it is. Or it could be, you know what, this is a completely legitimate email, but it's asking you to wire money. Don't do that without confirming outside of email. And if you've forgotten, here's a link to your company policy. In effect, turning the real emails received into continuous teachable moments. And what we found is what you say in those banners is really important. If you just say external, your users quickly realize, well, that's like telling my 2-year-old, be careful. Well, you need to be specific with your 2-year-old. Don't put your hand on the burner, right? Like selling somebody external doesn't really help them. So what we found is if you tell them something that's specific, like, hey, this is not necessarily who you think it is, be careful. We can't prove it's not this person, but we sure have doubts. Then users interpret that as useful to them and they engage with it more. And so, you know, this is sort of technology used to make visible to end users the AI's analysis, right? It's almost like, you know, think about playing chess by yourself versus playing chess using a chess computer. you're going to do a lot better with the chess computer helping you. In the same way, the AI that we use to detect malicious mails can also be used to give users more information about things they may not be able to see. Like, for example, in that Microsoft example I gave earlier, well, Inky's going to know, even though this looks identical to a real Microsoft mail, it didn't come from a legitimate Microsoft mail server, right? So we know this is not Microsoft. We can surface that information that's not visible to users, essentially give them a superpower and to let them see things they don't see.
So technology enablement. Huh?
Exactly. And the analogy I use also is self-driving cars, right? I mean, you wouldn't trust your life to the self-driving car AI, but it's not useless, right? It can keep you in the lane. It can keep you a certain distance from the car in front of you. So in the same way, the AI to detect malicious mails isn't perfect either, but it can be very useful in giving users guidance and giving them affordances.
I have a theory, given that the digital transformation over the last 2 years with COVID and all that stuff, with everyone working from home, with everyone relying far more on the communication channel, so that is one of the reasons why the situation overall became worse, that we see more phishing, more ransomware and all that stuff. Just a question to both of you, maybe Dave, you start. Do you see this the same? The numbers, the statistics you have seen from your customers and clients, and is that real, or is this just a feeling?
Totally real. I mean, COVID was a massive boon to the attackers, because think about it, when everyone was working in an office, when you'd get some email to ask you to wire money or send all of the payroll information, you could walk down the hall and say, hey, did you just ask me to send the whole payroll information? Like, no, I didn't send that mail. That's kind of an out-of-band confirmation of the identity of the sender, right? Your out-of-band confirmation is you walk down the hall and ask the person. Now that we're all working from home, we have to discipline ourselves, go out of band, go outside of the email client, go into Slack, go onto Signal, whatever, pick up the phone and confirm the identity of the sender, especially if it's a sensitive email. And that's one of the reasons why the yellow banner that we put on 10 to 15% of the mails works, because if nothing else, it makes the person pause. And once you get them to pause, they're like, hey, wait a minute, why would Ben be asking me to send the entire payroll to him? That's weird. Our job is almost like made a million times easier by the fact that we just made them slow down. So yeah, the work from home environment is massively conducive to fraudsters who are trying to impersonate people and brands, which is essentially the essence of phishing. It's generally impersonation of a person or a brand. And I think also this information overload that you talked about, it's so much worse, right? Now we have no boundary between work and home life, especially if you have little kids at home and they're like asking you for lunch right now, you're trying to get through your email, you're just distracted, right? So distraction is the attacker's best friend.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's massively different now than it was in 2019. And I think we're never going back to the, everyone in the office. And so it's this new normal. We're just going to have to live with it.
Totally agree. Ben, do you see the same from the CybSafe customer base, that there's more demand now for training which is addressing this specific environmental situation?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think it even just calculates just the training pieces. It's understanding that your environment has changed. And I'm going to say something now that I think some people will probably disagree with, and I'm open to it. Like, let's have a chat about it. But often people have a home me and a work me. When I used to go into the Dyson offices, I'd walk through the front doors, I would be work me. I'd still be pretty authentic, but there are certain things that I'd probably do at home that I wouldn't do at work, but I do at work that I wouldn't do at home. So for example, if I need to quickly do some Christmas shopping, if I'm at home, during my lunch break, I'm quickly going, okay, what do I need to get for a few people? Might accidentally use and I'm not using this as an example that I have necessarily done, I'm using it as a case, but they might use their work email to sign up for something that is non-work related. Again, increasing the exposure to social engineering. it's making it easier for these criminals. Similarly, if you're, I don't know, needing to, your kids are distracting, you go, here, listen, have my laptop, watch Netflix for 20 minutes. You don't know what your child's doing on there. Now, I'm not saying that you live with malicious hackers in your house, or your kind of 6-7-year-old child who wants to watch Peppa Pig on Netflix is going to do anything bad, but there are so many different things that I don't think people take into consideration. Now, how do we help them understand that? The kind of the things that I listed out here were kind of around this new normal of being at home is people with shared houses, or living with other people they don't know necessarily. I know a lot of friends in London live with people who they've never met before, but they're having sensitive phone calls with, and they work at EY, KPMG, about deals, big things that are going on, and they're not doing it kind of in a sensitive manner. Similarly, much more people are traveling, getting back to traveling now, privacy screens, people having conversations that are sensitive on trains, in airports, and so on. We've all probably got fairly out of the habit of locking our devices when we get out from our desks. Again, I live on my own, or part-time with my girlfriend, not to say that she's going to jump on and start doing things on my laptop that I wouldn't want, but leaving your devices in front of windows, if they're open, if you live on a ground floor apartment that somebody can just grab in and grab, leaving stuff on trains, buses, planes. There's all of these things to consider. And there's one example that really stuck out to me a couple of days ago. And I was talking to our behavioral science team about this. There's a new app that came out. I think it was actually launched in 2020, but it's picked up pace now. It's called Be Real. It's an app that was to make people more authentic. And it would send you a notification at a random interval of the day. And it would say, it's time to be real. And you've got 2 minutes to take a picture of whatever you're doing. Now, 70%, and this probably shows you how much I work, and I'm sorry if there's anybody on CybSafe on this call, but 70% of the time I get that notification, I am working, okay? I have my phone next to me, like just as normal. I saw a friend of mine, again, not going to name them, and this app takes a photo of what's in front of you and a photo of your face. So whatever you're doing, most of the time I'm working, fair enough. She works at an auction house, a very well-known auction house in the UK. And she just happened to be on a page that was had all the deal transactions, the amounts, the names, the email addresses, the countries that it was being shipped to, of big art deals. I'm talking in kind of like hundreds and thousands and millions of pounds, and posted on her Be Real. Again, whose responsibility is that to help them understand that that information is now on there for 24 hours or less, for anyone to see, unless they've got privacy settings set up. But these things are all developing all the time. It's kind of like a rolling train that never stops. The next app will come along, the next app. So kind of from a security standpoint, how do we help people understand that? How do we use influence programs, for example? How do we use technology to help manipulate that and help people understand that even though certain things have been a risk in the past, there are new things coming along. But yeah, this understanding that even if you're, and I used to say this to the people at Dyson, the moment you step out of the office, cybersecurity doesn't stop at those doors. It even probably amplifies itself the moment you step out of those doors. So it's drawing that attention. We're on a journey. We're getting there slowly. There's probably people banging their heads on this call now thinking, oh God, yeah, you're preaching to the converted. But it's super interesting. And that's why I love working in this industry, because it's constantly evolving. It's never the same kind of standstill situation. You're always trying to find things. And yeah, it's super interesting.
You know, Ben, the next time I see your girlfriend, I will ask her why you're always at work, but that's a different story. You know, but before we go into a real example, which I would be really interested to see is, you know, internally, the teams, the technology teams, the mail teams are very different from the cyber awareness teams, right? You know, from the, and I think goes then to both of you, maybe Ben, you start. Do you see the internal teams working closely enough together to address and to get the best out for the users, you know, from a technology and awareness point of view? Is this done already, or because most IT organizations or organizations in general work in silos, right? And the awareness people are in best case somewhere even second line in risk. not even close to IT, right? And then I think you get a challenge there just from the start, because if they don't talk, everyone does the things in isolation. Do you see anything of this happening already?
I think it's the classic case that communication breaks down, then most things break down. I think it's different at CybSafe. Like we are entirely remote, but so you have to, the only way you really communicate with people is either on a call or speaking in Slack channels and certain things. I think we've done a relatively good job internally about doing that. Speaking from a perspective of what I'm seeing, potentially, but the interesting thing I love seeing is the potential for organizations that are working in this space to collaborate between technology and the human aspect. And the example that I want to give was an example, again, I used the other week just because it baffled me, and it kind of encapsulated where we need to go, I feel. And it's with Google. I was writing an email to two people who both work at the same company, it's at PwC. And I typed in Johnny, the person I was emailing, and then I have about 6 people of the same with the same name in my contact list. I accidentally, because I was so busy, hit the wrong person. Google said, "You don't usually message these 2 people. Did you mean this person?" That's where technology has stepped in at the point I needed it and helped me to identify. And I work in this industry, but we have to remember, and I think Dave said it earlier, people have so many other things going on.
We're humans.
Yeah, we live and breathe this stuff. So we get up every day and think, okay, my work is in the line of cybersecurity. You have to think about what other people are doing. And Janan Budge, who's the principal analyst at Forrester, wrote a fantastic report about getting out of people's way, but also helping them at the point they need it. That, I feel, that intervention from Google, you can measure that change. How many times after I've had that intervention or that notification have I then continued to do it? Because then you can argue negligence. I'm being stupid. Not to say that people are stupid, but I'm deliberately deciding to ignore that. Versus you have that nudge and that intervention. How many times after, if I stopped doing afterwards, you created meaningful behavior change that has reduced risk. That's what I would argue, Andreas, you will probably agree, as a CISO, you want to see that. So that's where I see this partnership between tech and people being kind of aligned together.
Totally agree. Dave, do you see already teams working together, or that you have customers who say, look here, oh, look, we work together with the awareness team regarding messaging, or what, I think if I understood it right, your color thing, you can also give messages and linkages to awareness trainings or to policies and all that stuff. Do you see that working?
Yeah, I think our experience may be a little different from a typical mail protection vendor, because we so emphasize the, incorporating feedback and users and getting them involved and the email assistant concept. So usually when we present Inky to a prospect, we'll get excitement from the phishing awareness team as well as from the email security team, because both of them will see, oh, there's good stuff in here for me. Right. So the email security team's like, this will block more fish that's getting through my current SAG or whatever I'm using. And the phishing awareness people are like, oh, this is going to give me a much more streamlined experience for my employees to interact with emails, turn mails into teachable moments and report them. So we generally do see them work pretty closely together. I mean, they are siloed in the sense that in larger companies, they're almost always different orgs. But we do see them work together, and often it starts with that first kind of pitch meeting where we kind of go over the 50,000 foot view of here's what Inky does. Both of those constituencies have things that they get excited about when they see our pitch, basically.
Very interesting. We just got Janja just asked a question. Thanks for discussing this important topic. Question for both panelists. Can you give some concrete examples of things we regularly do in organizations' cultural mindsets that undermine cyber hygiene? Very interesting.
I got a great one here.
So go ahead.
I hear from companies all the time, oh, we're too small to be targeted. We're a little business. What would anybody target us for? And I tell people, you know how the attackers are getting your information about who to send those fake CEO mails to and who your CEO is? LinkedIn. And they're scraping LinkedIn for you as well as for HSBC. Everything on LinkedIn for large and small companies is getting hoovered up by scripts, turned into org charts, essentially virtual org charts, and used to target your employees with realistic mails from their bosses, sometimes even incorporating information like, hey, while I'm in France, can you go buy gift cards for me? Using information about the whereabouts of the employees. So one thing we're all doing, and we can't help it, but we really need to think about it, is we're putting all this stuff online on social media that's easily scraped and digested by machines that are then used to target us. And another example is the out of office auto email, the autoresponder. I will be out of the office in Mexico for the next week. Why did you tell somebody that? Now someone who mails you can now target your employee and say, while I'm in Mexico, can you do this thing for me? And that sounds super realistic, right? Because how would they know the person's in Mexico? So that's one thing, this sort of inadvertent publishing of your org chart and whereabouts is really damaging.
Totally agree. Ben, I'm sure you have something to add to that one as well.
Oh, you have the tin of worms. No, the two things that really get me are, and I mentioned this on the CybSafe podcast the other day, an episode that's being released early next year, speaking too technically about things that you would assume other people understand. There is nothing more infuriating. I'm non-technical. I did a marketing degree at uni. I kind of fell into cybersecurity, some would argue probably by accident, but don't tell my CEO. But explaining things too technically totally undermines everything you're trying to do around cyber hygiene and trying to help people. You infuriate them. You don't help yourselves. And it's important. I think if you are on this call and you have a team of people that you're looking for certain skills for, open your skills up to people who haven't got technical backgrounds, because they are the people who will be able to learn and understand the things that are technical, because most people can learn things, funnily enough, and then go and translate it into things that are digestible, understandable for the rest of the team and the company. The second point is complex policies and controls. And if they're constantly changing, they obviously have to change over time, but having rules for certain groups, no rules for other groups, it was impossible at Dyson, because we would have people who would they'd be working on new tech that was coming out all the time saying, oh, we need to be able to do this. And we'd be like, okay, fine. Yeah. Okay. Maybe you can do this. But actually another group needs to do this. So actually, no, we're going to take that control away from them because they have to do this. Having it kind of quite difficult. And there are, again, probably people screaming at the camera now saying, why on earth are you saying this? But the more simple, and I use that term because I don't think cybersecurity policies can be simple, but making it digestible for people to understand helps them understand it, and shows you as an enabler in the business rather than somebody who's just saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. You don't want to be the brick wall. You want to be the people that can say, actually, you know what? If you come to us and say this control is really irritating us or it's causing problems, we can look at how we can help you.
No, I agree. I think one from my own old experience is we often had information, like I mentioned before, how many people are using the company email address for their registration on LinkedIn, but we haven't done anything about it. And then the ransomware attack or something happened, and oh yeah, we knew that, right? And so there is an element of information knowledge in the organization, and just to ignore that is super duper dangerous, because it hits you sooner or later in one way or the other, right? And that's if you know something, go after it, work for it, make it transparent. There's nothing wrong to say, look, hey, 10% of all our employees use their company email address on LinkedIn, and start a campaign. It's not about blaming and shaming and all that stuff. It's about getting better together. And if you give them people alternatives on how to make the right things, right, that's very, very often very much appreciated. Given the point that we are on 46 minutes in, and I want both of you to have a closing, you to do your three things, I would still get the point across saying, if we talk about phishing and phishing attack, Ben, from your point of view, if you say, look, what are the approaches for technology and human for a phishing, or let's use phishing to really bring the people together? Just how do you see this? What's your recommendation for the people on the call here to say, look, do this at the minimum? Again, we talk about hygiene often to get things to a better state.
Oh, wow. Okay. I need to keep this concise, don't I? I think from a perspective of working with the people in the organization and helping them with phishing, understanding that a phishing simulation program, you need to run it in the right way, not telling people, for example, that you're running a phishing simulation because you think it's going to catch them out. Is such an old way of thinking. We need to move that out of the door and move it past it. There's a very good ebook again on CybSafe where we've talked about how to run phishing campaigns. So that's the kind of the main point around it. Similarly, and I wanted to touch on this earlier, but I obviously missed it. I'm sure people on the call have heard of ChatGPT. It's an AI kind of conversational chatbot. How can we as humans help with AI and look at the link between technology, obviously AI, and phishing, and helping people in the organization understand about it? If it's copying and pasting a phishing email into ChatGPT and saying, hey, is this malicious? It might not be further as far down the line as it needs to be at the moment, but that will change. It's AI is going to learn. So looking at that link between technology, but also from a wider perspective of not just phishing. I know you wanted me to focus on phishing, but I want to kind of cover the thing as a whole, is understanding that we can always learn and things will change, and be open to that learning and understanding and hearing from other people about, hey, I think this might work, this could work in protecting people and using technology and people together to ultimately protect the business and protect yourself when you're out of work as well.
Mm-hmm. David, what's your take?
Yeah, I would say, the ChatGPT example is really compelling because it just highlights again the need to level up both, your mail protection infrastructure and your training infrastructure. You've got to level up both of those. If you're relying on just Microsoft or just Google's protections, or you're relying on an incumbent secure email gateway, not enough anymore. We know there are specific tactics attackers are using to reliably transit those systems. And then on the phishing awareness side, all the reasons we talked about, we know that the typical way of doing that, the standard old way of doing it, isn't working anymore. You have to level up both of these. You must have some improved protection, better AI that uses new algorithms to identify more of this malicious stuff. I would say also, our particular angle is also that AI gives users guidance and affordances that help them make better choices and slow down at the right times. That ChatGPT example, I think, is much, much scarier than even what Ben implied, because now if I'm an attacker, I take over somebody's account, I don't even have to write the mail anymore. I just use ChatGPT to compose the mail. And now you need something like Inky that models people's conversational behavior and style to know that that's not really the person, right? I mean, essentially account takeover, the mail's coming from the person's real account, and it's somebody who's mailed your employee before. And now it could be coming from a robot that generates the text, and the text is plausible. The only way you're going to detect that that's not really that person is stylistic, right? The ChatGPT is going to create very nice, well-formed text. It's not going to match the style of the real person, though, at least not yet. We can still detect that, but it requires very different tactics and techniques on the defensive side than the incumbent systems are using. And then the other thing I'll add, and I know we're talking about phishing. People often ask me, what do I do about account takeover of my own account? Will Inky detect those? And yes, Inky will detect those. That's not the right way to solve the problem, though. For protecting your own accounts, use multi-factor authentication. Make it so it's impossible for people to take over your employees' accounts. You can't make the whole world use MFA, and that's why you need something like Inky to detect account takeovers from your third-party, conversational counterparties in email. But you can protect your own employees' accounts from getting taken over with MFA.
Totally agree. And before I ask you both for your closing statements or ideas, I want to bring up the comment which Jan just mentioned before. I think we as organizations can address and create a culture in our organization which allows people and also motivates people to speak up, not blaming and shaming and saying, like, here, guys, if something looks wrong, talk about it or tell someone, right? So that you have a chance to react. And, I had the pleasure to see into some organizations where people got blamed and shamed and killed for saying something, right? So the easy thing, the low hanging fruit for me is often to really give the people the freedom to say something if something is looking wrong. And we talked about cyber hygiene before, and I think that's a very important topic, bottom up and top down, where I can say, look here, that's within a team, within an organization, within the whole company, just people feeling safe to speak up, right? And that makes often such a difference. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, to be done, but I think if it's in the DNA of an organization, it's super duper powerful for everyone to do the right thing naturally. So before we close, I really want to give each of you the opportunity to have a kind of closing thoughts, the 1, 2, 3 things you want everyone to take home. We're saying, look, that's really important. If you do this, then you make a difference. And I think, Dave, as you started with it, so let's go. What are your thoughts there?
I think, it's going to sound funny, but the human brain is an amazing thing, right? Think about the fact that you can get an email from one of hundreds of brands. You've never seen that email before, and your brain immediately tells you what brand it's from. That's an incredible thing. We don't even know where we're doing. So what we think at Inky is humans are your last and probably most important part of your defense. Don't treat them as the problem, treat the users as an asset. And you're obliged, I think, to give them tools to use their brains in concert with the AI. The AI can surface things the user can't see necessarily, but use those human brains as the last line of defense. Don't just, you talked about blaming and shaming. Do the exact opposite. Turn your end users into superheroes by giving them superpowers.
Agree. And Ben, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, I agree with everything that David's just explained and highlights, and I don't think I can add much to it apart from think about how you can positively influence behavior change. We've come a long way, but similarly, we have a long way to go. Don't let that dishearten you. There is seriously positive signs of change, but we now must, as a collective, look at how we can do this and support people, because the problem's not going away.
Agree. Totally agree. So, before I close the thing, what's your tip for tonight? Argentina or Croatia?
I'm going for
my money would be on Argentina, but I'm rooting for Croatia.
Okay, Ben?
I'm going for Croatia. I'm an underdog. I love it. We'll only find out.
Would be amazing, right? So, but let's see. We will figure it out tonight, 8 o'clock CET. We will see what happens. So, both of you, thanks so much for the time and the effort and for the insights you shared with us. It's always nice to learn something and to see the different opinions and different viewpoints. And to everyone on the call, if there's anything which we talked about and if you want to follow up, go and reach out to the CyberWeight team and the Heckle last. They're all available. Get on the webpage. You have also the Inky homepage, the CybSafe homepage for additional information. Now you have the insiders, what's to do. As we had 5 of these CISO talks already in 2022, we will do another 5 or 6 in 23. We haven't finished or finalized the dates so far. Obviously, the first one will be beginning of February, and it's most probably about something about cloud security, because we get a lot of questions around that. And with that, I think, thank you. I want to thank every one of you. Wish everyone a good festive season, hopefully a great time with the loved ones, and hopefully you get the same amount of snow and good weather like I had around me the last couple of days. And with that, thanks to everyone, and all the best.
Thanks, Andreas.
Cheers.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.